Welcome to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast. I'm your guest host, Leigh Klekar. I am the producer of the Speaking of Women's Health podcast, and I'm so happy to be back in the Sunflower House to host a new podcast episode. June is Alzheimer's Disease and Brain Awareness Month, a month dedicated to raising awareness about dementia and the importance of taking care of our brains. So this episode is all about brain health and Alzheimer's disease and dementia. According to the Alzheimer's Association, there are 55 million people worldwide living with Alzheimer's and other dementias. And this is a really special topic for me personally, as I actually worked at the Alzheimer's Association as one of their development directors, where I managed their walk to end Alzheimer's here in the Cleveland area. And it really hit home with me because I got to work closely with so many caregivers and their family members, and so many wonderful volunteers who, had their own jobs, but in their few minutes of spare time would work so closely with me to put together this large fundraiser for the Alzheimer's Association because it meant so much to them. They had a family member, most of them, who either had Alzheimer's or a form of dementia, and just saw how difficult it was for that family member and wanted to do something to give back and, participate in the fundraising aspect of it to help find a cure. Alzheimer's disease, it's a degenerative brain disease, and it's the most common cause of dementia. So it's a form of dementia. Dementia is sort of at the top of the umbrella, and Alzheimer's disease falls under it as one of the forms of dementia. Alzheimer's specifically accounts for 60 to 80% of dementia cases. And dementia is not a specific disease. It's an overall term that describes a group of symptoms. And, we may have, moments when I remember when my great grandmother was alive and I was a very small girl, that she wasn't very verbal. She lived with my grandma and kind of sat on the couch most of the day. And my grandma would just tell me that, oh, she's older and this and that. But Alzheimer's, it's not a normal part of aging. So that's something that's really important to know. There is a difference between just some memory loss that comes with aging compared to a form of dementia. And the greatest known risk factor is actually increasing age. And the majority of people with Alzheimer's are age 65 and older. Alzheimer's disease is considered to be younger onset Alzheimer's if it affects a person under the age of 65. And younger onset can also be referred to as early onset Alzheimer's. And people with younger onset Alzheimer's they can be, in the early, middle, or late stage of the disease. Alzheimer's does worsen over time. It is a progressive disease where dementia symptoms gradually worsen over a number of years. And in its early stages, memory loss is mild, but with late stage Alzheimer's, individuals lose the ability to carry on a conversation and respond to their environment. And on average, a person with Alzheimer's lives 4 to 8 years after the diagnosis, but they can live as long as 20 years, depending on other factors. Alzheimer's, it does not have a cure. There are 2 treatments that demonstrate that removing the beta amyloid, one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, from the brain reduces cognitive and functional decline in people living with early Alzheimer's. Now, one of these treatments will be discontinued in November of 2024. So please connect with your physician on your treatment options and make sure that you know if one of your treatments, if you're taking it or someone you're caregiving is taking that, is familiar that it is discontinuing and what the next step should be. There are other treatments that can temporarily slow the worsening of dementia symptoms and improve quality of life for those with Alzheimer's and their caregivers. And today, there is a worldwide effort underway to find better ways to treat the disease, delay its onset, and prevent it from developing. And again, one of those, the top organizations that's really raising money to find a cure for Alzheimer's and dementia is the Alzheimer's Association. And speaking of them, if someone you know or yourself has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or another dementia, just know that you're not alone. Um, the Alzheimer's Association, they actually have so much information, not just on their website, but they have a 24/7 helpline that you can call for free. And they can provide um, credible information, education, referral, and support. Also, there are local Alzheimer's Association chapters. So the one that I worked for is in the Cleveland area and supported many counties surrounding the Cleveland area. We actually, in the Cleveland chapter as well, provide free care and support services to families impacted by Alzheimer's and dementia. So if you go to their website, which is alz.org, so alz.org, you can go to it's called your chapter, where you can type in your zip code or search by state to see where your chapter is, and find out what type of services they provide. But really, that helpline, though, and I'll give the number out now as well, is 800-272-3900. That is a great resource. So even if you have a family member or yourself, you have a small question, or you want to see, is this symptom, do other people experience it, or just to know that you aren't alone, it's they'll answer. You'll talk to a live person, and they're experts in the field. And if for any reason they don't have an answer for you, they will get it and they will get back to you. So I really do highly recommend that service. Something I really want to dive into during this podcast episode is to discuss the signs of Alzheimer's and other dementias. Because as we talked about, as we get older, our memory will often change, but memory loss that disrupts daily life is not a typical part of aging and could be a sign of Alzheimer's or other dementia. So I want to go through that 10 signs. Um, and just please note that if you are concerned about any memory loss, or someone in your family or a friend or anyone that you're caring about, just be sure to schedule an appointment with your physician and see an expert, as this is not medical advice. So, number one of the 10 signs of memory loss is memory loss that disrupts your daily life, which we touched on. So, one of the most common signs is forgetting recently learned information. So, others include forgetting important dates or events, asking the same questions over and over, and increasingly needing to rely on memory aids like reminder notes, or maybe notes you've made in your phone or iPad or on the computer. And also needing to rely on family members for things that they used to be able to handle on their own. So how can you compare that to what is a typical age-related change? Because as we said, we're going to have some memory changes as we do get older. But a typical age-related change would be just sometimes forgetting names or appointments, but remembering them later. So it comes back to you. Number two, for knowing the 10 signs of memory loss that is not a typical part of aging, is challenges in planning or solving problems. So some people, they can experience changes in their ability to develop and follow a plan or work with numbers. They may have trouble following a familiar recipe or keeping track of monthly bills, especially those recipes that you're making every week, or a long family recipe you make for the holidays every year, not being able to, follow that anymore like you used to. And they may also have difficulty concentrating and take much longer to do things than they did before. So, what would be a typical age related change? Well, that would be just making occasional errors when managing finances or household bills. Number three is difficulty completing familiar tasks. So, people living with memory changes from Alzheimer's or another dementia often find it hard to complete daily tasks. Sometimes they may have trouble driving to a familiar location, organizing a grocery list, or remembering the rules of a favorite game. Um, so my grandmother, she had a form of dementia, and I do remember as even in the beginning, I had been living in my house for probably 5 years or so, and she couldn't remember how to drive there, so she took the really long way. So wouldn't get on the highway, but took like the back roads, which took her probably triple the amount of time. But I was like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know why she, couldn't remember that. And I remember thinking that, well, then as other symptoms started to show up, we realized, and then we took her to a physician, and she was diagnosed with dementia. Uh, but a typical age-related change to this would be occasionally needing help to use the microwave settings or to record a TV show. And I mean, gosh, nowadays that's that's something that is pretty common in our house, because so many we are constantly changing our provider for our cable, or using like internet cable, YouTube TV. And I'm like, oh my goodness, now I have to start all over and learn a new way of how to record my shows. So, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that out there. I know my dad will call me, oh my goodness, I'm trying to record my weekly weekly show, and we're having him walk him through it. So, number four, for knowing the 10 signs of Alzheimer's or other dementia, is confusion with time or place. So, people who are living with the disease can lose track of dates, seasons, and the passage of time. And they may have trouble understanding something if it is not happening immediately. Sometimes they may forget where they are or how they got there. And so, what would be a typical age related change? Well, getting confused about the day of the week, but then figuring it out later. Number five is trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. So, some people living with Alzheimer's or other dementia could experience vision changes, and this may lead to difficulty with balance or trouble reading. Again, my grandma was an avid reader. I would even, as I got older, borrow her books because she had some wonderful romance novels I liked. And I would go to the library and I would get her books, or, my mom would buy her the large print books, offer to take her to the library, and she just didn't want to read anymore. And we couldn't figure it out. And then again, after the dementia was diagnosed, we realized, well, she was having trouble reading. So, um, they can also have problems judging distance and determining color or contrast, which causes issues with driving. So, what would be a typical age related change? Well, that would be more vision changes related to cataracts. Number six is new problems with words in speaking or writing. So, people living with Alzheimer's or dementia can have trouble following or joining a conversation, and they may stop in the middle of a conversation and have no idea how to continue, or they may repeat themselves. They may struggle with vocabulary or have trouble naming a familiar object, or use the wrong name. So, calling maybe a watch, a hand clock. Again, I remember with my grandma, a lot of times we would go to visit her, have her over, if we'd even go out to dinner. I would just notice that she would sit there more and more, not saying anything, almost just kind of looking lost. And that was hard to see, especially because she was such a wonderful conversationalist when we were growing up. And what would be a typical age related change? Well, that would be sometimes having trouble finding the right word, and then eventually it coming to you, or finding another word that would still make sense. Number 7, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. So, a person living with Alzheimer's or other dementia may put things in unusual places. They may lose things and be unable to go back over their steps to find them again. And he or she may accuse others of stealing, especially as the disease progresses. What's a typical age related change? That would be misplacing things from time to time and then being able to retrace your steps and find that item. Number 8, decreased or poor judgment. Individuals living with Alzheimer's or other dementia may experience changes in judgment or decision making. For example, they may use poor judgment when dealing with money, or pay less attention to grooming or keeping themselves clean. Especially if they have a standing weekly, let's say for a woman, hair appointment where they get their hair washed and done, and you're noticing that they don't want to do that anymore, might not even remember that's something that they typically do. Um, so not even, brushing their hair. What would be a typical age related change? Making a bad decision or a mistake once in a while, like neglecting to change the oil in the car, which I just like to avoid that anyways. It always feels like it's such an ordeal taking my car in for an oil change because it's a whole day process and then you're without a car. Number 9, withdrawal from work or social activities. So, a person living with Alzheimer's or other dementia may experience changes in the ability to hold or follow a conversation. And as a result, they may withdraw from hobbies, social activities, or other engagements. And they may have trouble keeping up with a favorite team or activity, not wanting to go to their weekly class at the community center, or if they were, you know, um, part of a book club, or even just a favorite, their local baseball team and not watching that anymore, listening to it on the radio. And what would be a typical age related change? That would be sometimes feeling uninterested in family or social obligations. And number 10 is changes in mood and personality. So, individuals living with Alzheimer's or dementia may experience mood and personality changes. They can become confused, suspicious, depressed, fearful, or anxious. And they may be easily upset at home with friends, or when out of their comfort zone. And a typical age related change would be developing very specific ways of doing things and becoming irritable when a routine is disrupted. So, I want to jump into a few ways that maybe we can lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. And one of the main ways is a healthy lifestyle. So, even small healthy habits will make a difference. And to improve brain health and maintain cognitive function with age, the brain needs stimulation and support. Dr. Sandra Darling, who is a physician in the Center for Integrative and Lifestyle Medicine at Cleveland Clinic, she has written a couple guest columns on speakingofwomenshealth.com about brain health and how to improve memory. And in one of her columns, she shares 6 ways to stimulate and support your brain that are part of a healthy lifestyle. So I want to go through those because these are really great ways at home to make modifications in your life if you're not already doing that, that can lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And number 1 is feed your brain. One of the most important ways to support the brain is through a variety of nutrients. Dietary approaches that provide optimal nutrition include the whole food plant-based diet, the Mediterranean diet, and the Mind diet. And if you go on speakingofwomenshealth.com and search for any of those diets, we give a lot of great examples on what foods are in those diets and how to get started on that type of diet. Because most of these diets, they emphasize whole, unprocessed foods and have little to no animal foods. So examples of, let's say, whole foods and then their processed versions would be an apple versus apple chips from the snack aisle, and then rolled oats versus a cereal made from oat flour. And apple chips and breakfast cereals are examples of ultra processed foods. These foods deliver a 1-2 punch to the brain from the high amounts of sweeteners, sodium, and the unhealthy fats, along with the lack of fiber and nutrients the brain needs to thrive. So sadly, ultra processed foods make up the bulk of calories consumed in the US, and we really need to drastically cut back on these foods.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Are you anxious about aging in the home? I know I am. For myself and for family members who need or will need care in the home. I've put together an informal podcast where I ask the owner of a home care company, her nursing leaders, and a variety of guests about how caregiving works in the home so that people can stay in their homes longer. We talk about everything from innovative thinking to basic tips in a conversational style that is optimistic. The podcast is called Keep Me Home Longer. Click on the link in the show notes or search for the podcast name, Keep Me Home Longer.
So it's important to take a look at the labels on your foods and see what's in them before consuming. Processed meats like bacon and deli meat are especially harmful. In a study of almost 500,000 middle-aged adults, each additional 25 grams of processed meat intake per day was associated with a 52 increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. And 25 grams is approximately about one slice of bacon, or one half of a sausage link, or one slice of deli ham. So instead of bacon and eggs for breakfast, maybe try a bowl of oatmeal with nuts and berries, or whole grain toast topped with avocado. And the cumulative effect of every healthy food choice you make will result in a positive change in your brain and body, regardless of your age. So it's, start now if you haven't already. And it can be small changes. If you haven't heard my podcast interview with Alexis Supan, who's a registered dietitian at Cleveland Clinic, her and I talk about the anti-inflammatory diet, and she gives some really great tips, because it's really hard to switch the way you eat overnight. So she has suggested in the podcast interview, make a small change, just start small. And, every week, keep moving forward. So speaking of keep moving, that's number 2 of one of the ways to stimulate and support your brain to have a healthy lifestyle. So physical activity supports the brain through different mechanisms, including lowering the blood pressure, improving vascular function, and delivering blood, oxygen, and nutrients to the brain. Studies demonstrate an inverse relationship between physical activity and dementia. So the more physical activity, the lower the risk. Even some exercise is better than none. And participants who did low to moderate amounts of exercise in the study, they had a 35% lower risk of cognitive decline in one meta-analysis. A good strategy for brain health is to move more and sit less, because sedentary behavior is linked to cognitive decline and dementia, as well as other diseases like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and premature death. So I know in a lot of our jobs, we're sitting a lot of the day. And I know many of our women's health experts have suggested, getting up every hour, even if it's to just take a quick walk down the hall, maybe use the bathroom, fill your water, have a healthy snack, whatever it is that you need to do just to keep your body moving as much as you can. So, exercise does protect the brain from atrophy, which is volume loss, specifically in the areas associated with memory, like the hippocampus and frontal lobes. To keep your brain sharp, aim for 150 minutes, so about 2.5 hours of moderate physical activity per week, like going for a brisk walk. We're in the nice months now, being in June, and hopefully the weather is good and we aren't having too much rain. So it's a great time to get outside and get our exercise, take a walk, go for a jog. And then you're getting your vitamin D as well. Number 3 is engaging in conversation. So communication stimulates and engages different parts of the brain. And it also involves social interaction, which is an important aspect of brain health, especially for older adults, because social isolation after age 65 is one of the modifiable risk factors of dementia. So consider joining a conversation group or a book club, or maybe take an acting class at your local community college or any type of class. One of our retired nurses, Lily McKinney, she's been on the podcast twice now. Dr. Thacker has interviewed her, but her most recent interview, which is her post-retirement update, she shares that she's taking 2 or 3 classes at the local community college, a couple of them in person, one virtually, and she loves it. I mean, she's getting that brain health by stimulating her brain and learning something new. And then by being in a classroom with others, she's getting that, engagement and conversation. So take a listen to that episode as well if you haven't either. Number 4 is reduce screen time, which, yes, we all know we need to do that. Watching television, movies, and videos, and scrolling on social media, those are sedentary, non stimulating activities. And they draw us in and keep us hooked. A few minutes can easily turn into, an hour or more. In one study, more than 3.5 hours of TV per day was associated with a dose dependent decline in verbal memory or vocabulary over 6 years. And the more time spent watching TV, the more harm was done. So, when I think about how many hours do I typically spend or my family members on non stimulating activities like watching TV, makes me want to go outside. So try and dedicate some time each day to engage in activities that are both stimulating and enjoyable, which, is a great transition to number 5 in of the 6 ways to stimulate your brain, and that's try something new. So, Dr. Darling suggests that learning new things, especially activities that require some brain power, they stimulate different parts of the brain and strengthen the brain functions. The brain needs to be challenged, especially people that go to college or work at cognitively stimulating jobs. They are less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. And that's just as exercise strengthens the muscles and protects the bones as we age. Learning new things protects the brain. So she suggests a couple different ideas here. Number 1, take an adult education class at your local community college, which we just chatted about. Number 2, learn a new skill, maybe woodworking, photography, knitting. Knitting is definitely on my list of a skill I want to learn. Once I have a little bit more time, right now I'm raising kids and working, but that is something I'd love to do when I hit that retirement age. My grandma, the one who was diagnosed with dementia, she actually did teach me how to knit, how to crochet. But I could not figure out I would just do one long line. So I'd have almost like a string that was crocheted because I couldn't figure out how to connect the ends and, make a blanket or a hat or anything. So I would love to learn how to knit. Um, Another idea Dr. Darling suggests is maybe take a cooking class, travel to a foreign country and learn some of the key words and phrases. Yes, love to go to a foreign country. Take music lessons to learn a new instrument. And I know that uses a different part of the brain too, which is probably why she's suggesting that, because it's a stimulation of a different side of the brain. And then her last idea and suggestion is to volunteer. And if you enjoy games and puzzles, there are brain games on websites such as AARP, Brain HQ, and Lumosity. Number 6. So the last way to improve our brain health and reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia is to maintain a sense of purpose. Studies have shown that people who have a sense of purpose in their lives typically live longer and often report greater fulfillment. Work provides a sense of purpose and provides structure and social interaction. Work-related tasks stimulate the brain through the use of different cognitive functions like thinking, reasoning, communicating, organizing, and problem solving. So early retirement is actually associated with accelerated cognitive decline because the brain is less stimulated. So as they say, use it or lose it. So keep your brain active through work or other activities that serve your purpose. So if you do have that wonderful ability to retire early, maybe try volunteering for an organization you're passionate about to get that same stimulation that you would have for work-related tasks. And these guidelines can help to improve brain health and lower the risk of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. And the more you can stimulate and support your brain through a healthy lifestyle, the more your brain will benefit. And Dr. Darling suggests starting with one positive change today. Even small changes will add up. So remember, it's never too late to build a better brain. And if you're interested in a cognitive assessment focused on the lifestyle related risk factors of dementia, you can schedule a brain screening at the Cleveland Clinic Center for Integrative and Lifestyle Medicine. And to get that assessment, you can call 216 448 4325 and choose option 1. And for those of you that are not in the Cleveland area, do some research to see what options you have in your area if you're interested in a cognitive assessment.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hey, quick question for you. Are you someone who wants to be fit, healthy, and happy? And what if I told you you could get your dream body by simply just listening to a podcast? I'm Josh.
And I'm KG, and we're the hosts of the Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast.
Listen, we get it. Fitness isn't easy. Carbs, no carbs.
Just stop, okay? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And that's why we made this podcast. We get straight to the facts so you can become your best you.
So the way to check us out is click the link in the show notes or search Fit, Healthy, and Happy podcast on any of the major podcast platforms. We'll see you soon.
So in addition to living a healthy lifestyle, there are studies that have shown that hormone therapy and vitamin D are linked to reduced rates of Alzheimer's disease. Women, we actually haven't talked about this yet. Women are more likely than men to develop Alzheimer's, with women making up 2/3 of the population living with Alzheimer's. And a new study, which was led by Mass General Brigham researchers, sheds light on the relationship between the risk of Alzheimer's disease and age of menopause and use of hormone therapy. And the results published in JAMA Neurology indicate that early age at menopause may be a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and dementia, but that women who were prescribed hormone therapy around the age of menopause onset did not show increased risk. And the National Alzheimer's Center, they performed a study on the effects of vitamin D on dementia incidence. And it was found that vitamin D exposure was associated with a 40% lower dementia incidence versus no exposure. And vitamin D effects were significantly greater in females versus males. Dr. Thacker, she did a wonderful podcast episode in season 1 called Why Women Need Vitamin D. And if you have not listened to that or just need a refresher, I highly recommend it, as she discusses how much vitamin D you need and how best to get your vitamin D and how to know if you're vitamin D deficient. So if you or someone you know has been recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, there are a few things that you can do to make things just a little bit better and to make things feel maybe a little bit more normal as best as you can. So, starting with like coping with the memory problems. Um, a few suggestions are to keep a notebook with you to record important information like phone numbers, names, ideas you have, appointments, your address, and directions to your home. You can place notes around the house when you need to remember things, even if you just use little sticky notes. Also, labeling cupboards and drawers with either the words or pictures that describes their contents. Can place important phone numbers in large print next to the phone. You can ask a family or friend to call and remind you of important things you need to remember, such as maybe meal times, medication times, appointments. You can use a calendar to keep track of time and to remember important dates. You can use photos of people that you see often and then label it with their names. And then to keep track of phone messages, this is going old school, but use an answering machine. That way you won't have to maybe have the struggle of the technology with a smartphone, cell phone. So, what is the best way to plan the day? So, this is if you have been recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, or you're a caregiver. These are some really helpful tips to kind of help the day not feel so overwhelming. So, find things to do that you enjoy and are able to do safely. It will be easier to accomplish your tasks during the times of the day when you feel best. Allow yourself the time to do the things you need to do. So don't feel rushed or let other people rush you. And if something gets too difficult, just take a break and ask for help if you need it. So, how can you avoid getting lost? Or how can a person newly diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia avoid getting lost? So, ask someone to go with you when you go out and ask for help if you need it. And just explain that you have a memory problem, you're feeling a bit lost and confused right now. And going back to the beginning of our tips here with keeping a notebook on you or notes with important information like your address, your name, directions to your home. So showing that notebook and then, asking for help. So what will, make communicating easier? So for those newly diagnosed, here are some helpful tips. Always take your time and don't feel rushed. And if you need to, ask the person you're speaking with to repeat what he or she is saying, or ask them to speak slowly if you're not understanding. And avoid distracting noises and background noises and find a quiet place to talk. So here's a big question. Can they continue to drive? And I know this is a tough subject for the patients and the caregivers, but if you are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, you should not be driving. Driving is a very difficult task. We spend a lot of time learning how to drive, when we turn 15 and a half and 16, getting our temps, taking driving lessons, taking classes, driving with your guardian. And I know all this right now because my son is in that phase, very nerve wracking, but it is a difficult task. It just doesn't come to you. You took the time to learn it and become very good at it for a lot of years. So even persons with very mild symptoms, they do have more crashes, and that's a danger to you and to others. So you do need to have that conversation that there should not be driving, and then finding an alternative. So having a plan in place where you're having family and friends who can take you out when you want to go out. So on Mondays, if you like to go to the library, or Tuesdays, you'd like to go to your community center, and Wednesdays, you have your book club, put a plan in place where there is someone to take you there. So you don't feel like you're losing your freedom, or as if you're a caregiver, you don't feel like you're taking away someone else's freedom. So it's a really important part of putting together that plan in place. So if you or someone you know and love is dealing with Alzheimer's disease or dementia, I do strongly encourage you to take advantage of your local Alzheimer's Association's resources, as we talked about earlier in the episode. Even if it's just calling the free 24/7 hotline to talk with an expert, they can reassure you about common symptoms, common behavior, and answer any questions you have. Any questions. They can also help provide assistance with choosing a physician or long-term care, hospice care, finding a memory care certified nursing home or assisted living community, and they can help with adult day centers. This was something I learned about when I worked at the Alzheimer's Association. I didn't really know, I was not familiar with them because when my grandma had dementia, I had never heard of adult day centers, but these are great. They provide a chance for those living with Alzheimer's and dementia to be social and to participate in activities that are staffed by professionals, like music activities, exercise, and it's all in a safe environment. And it also gives the caregiver a chance to take a much needed break to either rest, run errands, or finish some tasks that they've just been pushing aside. Because when you're taking care of someone with dementia, it's a full-time job. It's a lot. And speaking of caregivers, I really do hope to do another episode in November on caregiving tips, because November is National Family Caregivers Month and National Alzheimer's Disease Awareness Month. And caregiving for a family member or a friend or anyone with Alzheimer's and dementia is so much work. So we have a lot of great tips on speakingofwomenshealth.com for the caregivers, and I really want to do another episode on that. So stay tuned. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Speaking of Women's Health podcast. And we are so grateful, Dr. Thacker and I, for your ongoing support and listening to our episodes in season 1 and now in season 2. And we hope you will consider doing so and, share our podcast with friends, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. And to subscribe, it's free. So all you have to do is go to your Apple Podcasts or Spotify or TuneIn or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe to the Speaking of Women's Health podcast. And if you have a question or topic that you would like for us to discuss on a future podcast episode, visit speakingofwomenshealth.com, fill out our Contact Us form, and tell us what you want to hear. And we may just talk about it on a future episode. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time in the Sunflower House.